Yeah, so when we set out to create Servoy 8, we looked closely at what is going on in the market, and Servoy's Ajax technology was already leading, in particular when we launched it 7 years ago for the first time. But we also realized that Ajax technology is getting towards its end as new experiences are starting to become significant and important in developing web applications. So that was one of the starting points. And a second and very important one is that HTML5 has now become the standard for business applications and the user interface towards business applications. So looking at that as well, but also the next step, which is HTML6. The standards for HTML6 are already getting started as we speak. And one of the key components in it are web components, which make it much easier to create powerful user interfaces, as we'll discuss a bit more in detail in a second. Another important item is making it easier to integrate existing data. APIs have become very much a standard in business applications, and also being able to integrate easily with existing data sources becomes more and more important. What we've also seen in the Servoy world is that it becomes increasingly important to be able to develop and create and deliver modern user experiences on top of existing software. So not only using Servoy as a full stack, so from beginning to end as an end-to-end solution, but also taking existing .NET, Java, and also 4GL type of products like Progress and creating modern user experiences on top of those existing applications without having to rewrite the backend business logic. So when we set out to create Servoy 8, our goal is again to deliver a 4GL-like experience, so where many other products force you to code a lot of HTML by yourself. For us, delivering and making it very easy to have a powerful IDE remains a very important ingredient in getting Servoy 8 out. So quick dive into what makes Servoy 8. First of all, Servoy 8 is introducing a new client. So the existing client technologies continue to exist, the web client and the smart client, and a new client which we've named NG, the next generation client, is all HTML5 based, and it mainly has three concepts, and of course it is as backwards compatible as possible. So that means that you're able to take existing Servoy 7 applications and easily move them up to version 8. First, and probably most important, is the concept of web components. And web components make it much easier for you to have a lot more freedom in how your objects look like and how they behave within your application. We sort of describe that without getting too technical. Here's a brief overview of how you would create the component on the left and on the right in Servoy 7 and earlier. So in Servoy 7, if you'd like to create the component that we're looking at now, you'd have to create a button, you'd have to create an image on top of that, a label to display the time, another label to display the text above, another image that displays the icon. Then if you design all of those, then group them, and etc. And Servoy 8, all of this goes away, and you can create one component that contains all of this behavior. So it's much easier to create your own custom components versus relying on what Servoy provides out of the box. Of course, what we today provide out of the box, like a label and a field, etc., will continue to exist as well in Servoy 8. So this is a bit more a graphical overview on how that looks like. So effectively, everything is externalized to Servoy 8, and Patrick will show it in real life, so that will make it a bit easier to understand. The second important aspect of Servoy 8 is responsive design. So Servoy 7 and before always have had a fixed and absolute layout manager. In Servoy 8, we're also introducing a flow layout manager, which allow you to support responsive design much easier. So you can, for example, take bootstrap layouts and start using them within Servoy. And the third important component is a new form editor. The new form editor actually doesn't look like this screenshot, but is a new, what you see is what you get form editor that even goes a step further than our previous form editor. It will show you in real time and live how your application is going to look like. So it's even more what you see is what you get than in previous versions of Servoy. So in short, and before we dive into Patrick's demo, Servoy 8 makes it easier to deliver great user experience for enterprise applications, makes it easier to deliver and create versus in 7 where you'd have to do some workarounds to deliver advanced user experiences, and our motto, building and delivering great applications, will continue in Servoy 8. So with that, let's dive into a real-life demo with Patrick, and he also has a couple of slides to go into more the technical side of Servoy 8. I'm going to switch the presentation over to Patrick. Let's see. So over to you, Patrick.
My screen is visible?
Yep, looks good.
Excellent. Let me get this
I hope everybody is
meeting out of the way.
High resolution monitor to see everything.
Is everything visible?
Yep, looks good.
Yeah, excellent. All right, before we take a closer look at how components are built, etc., we have a short overview of just a few of the possibilities. One thing that is noticeable here is that we have a third button to start a client, obviously, because there is a third one now. So I'm going to push this one and start it up. So what you see here is the notorious Servoy sample CRM that has been rearranged slightly by a colleague of mine for Servay World. So the data is more or less the same, but all the visual elements here are web components. So you can see that this looks completely different than the old version. Starting with a menu, for example, we have a component here that shows the companies that we have here, like this 4. But it shows also another found set of contacts that you have in these companies. So a component obviously can have can be based on found sets and can have even more than just one. So, for example, one of the things that are pretty tough to do today in a web client is a component like this. This is called a timeline, I think. You see that it nicely groups different information, uses an icon depending on the type. You can actually go to a comment here. Now the row becomes bigger. So just things that are basically standard these days in modern web applications can be built into Servoy fairly easy these days. For those of you who have tried to do this in the web client, this is quite some work to do. With a web component, this becomes way easier. I hope that becomes obvious when we try to build one a bit later. So here I can just enter my comment, and hit on post comment, and then now we have a different representation of this. You can collapse the comments and expand them again. So another component that in this case is built on a font set as well. So on the right here, this component here is called Visualize.js. It's a Jasper JavaScript library that allows you to embed any reports from a Jasper server. So you can interact here in terms of choosing a different chart type. Well, if it does load. Oh, it doesn't want to load. Maybe demo server has gone down. Well, anyway, very easy to integrate this. It's just a component that embeds the Visualize.js and puts a few properties on it, like a server address, etc. So this was not much work to accomplish. This one here is a little donut chart, I think it's called. You can see when I go through the records here that it is tied to a data provider and updates automatically. So all these kind of things that you frequently see these days in web applications become fairly easy to do in Servoy 8. So let's have a look at the next screen. There's, of course, the must-have Google map. So when we go over the different companies here, you can see how the map changes. So at least my internet connection is okay. Another nice thing that you can frequently find in web applications these days are those inline edit fields. So I can click here, edit something and cancel, or edit and save. So when you hover with a mouse, it's actually a label, but when you hover with a mouse, it becomes a field. You click in it, and you get the edit controls. So what do we have here? I think Paolo did some nice stuff here. Yeah, right. I don't know how the component is called, a flip icon or something. So you can see when I hover with a mouse over it, it turns these images around and shows the name and the position. Another thing that you see everywhere are these grouped buttons. So it just toggles the state. It has a value list attached. So you can nicely integrate these kind of components into Servoy by, for example, providing value lists to components like these. I can actually create a new contact here. Let's put me in there. Patrick. Let me fill this out. Okay, now I'm down here. Don't have an image, but you see that whatever I type in here is directly bound to the component here that is based on a font set. So the font set notices a new record, and this component will instantly update itself. So in the market section here, we have the notorious carousel, also a font set based component that goes through the products down here and displays their image. Another nice thing that you can find all over the place are those tokenizers. So I can select a few of these, hit the search, and it will filter the two out here. And you can easily remove the criteria again, find them all. This has also is a value list attached. So it's completely data bound, and there's no need to manually insert any list elements or anything like that. It just gets its data from the solution in the backend. So let's see what we have here. I can buy a product. So if I hit a confirm here, it puts it in my shopping cart. Now if I say I don't want to buy this, then you see down here in the right corner the little notification. That is actually a nice HTML5 feature. This notification will even show up on your desktop if I get all this out of the way. So this is even outside the browser, you can show these kind of notifications if the user allows you to do that. So the first time you want to show something like this, the browser will ask if that is allowed. So let's buy some stuff here. I can purchase these. Now we have a different screen that shows a progress bar up here. I can continue, the progress bar will update. Now I think I have to fill all this out to get out of here.
Yeah, there's a comment from there's a comment from Bob meanwhile, and the comment is awesome.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, that is pretty cool. I agree.
There's a question from Gary. Is the NGClient now functioning as a single web page application, or are new pages being pushed?
No, that's a single page application.
Yeah.
Let's see. Loop updates nicely. And now you see another notification up here that's a different type. I think it's a toaster. The library is called toaster. It fades away. So nice stuff like that. Let's see, I think when I create an order, I have that here in the timeline as well. Yeah, you see here, has placed a new order. There's a little rounding problem, obviously. I can like this, hit the Facebook like button, and probably the sales chart did also update. So this as a quick overview of what the possibilities are. These are just a few components that we found on the web somewhere and integrated for the demo purpose here. Basically, you can build anything that you will find somewhere on the web that you can wrap into a component, can be easily integrated into Servoy. So next step is that I have prepared a few slides. Let's see what PowerPoint does to me if I hit, where is that? If I hit show, does the screen still show what it should?
Yes, it does. Looks good. There's a question from Kieran, meanwhile. Is this text controls with tick, cross, are they pre-built? Can they work with enter, return, or escape keys?
When I tried these, it didn't work, but I guess you can make that work, yeah? I don't know. I haven't built that component, but that should be possible, yeah?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. That's just a nifty little JavaScript on the client side. We will see how that works, hopefully, in a few minutes. So, NGClient and Web Components. So what are Web Components? Web Components are an emerging standard that aims to modularize the web. So the idea is that you can define reusable HTML elements that you can integrate anywhere. Web components are encapsulated, so they are their own little thing. And there are a bunch of frameworks popping up that make use of web components. AngularJS is probably the most widespread, but there's also Polymer that's more for the browser guys. I understood that they are merging a bit. Both are backed by Google. Then there's Ember and React, but Servoy chose AngularJS. I guess that it is just the most common framework used out there, so it made sense to use that. So, how does Servoy play together with web components? As Jan mentioned already, there's a new deployment option, the NGClient. Just like the web client, the NGClient is a strictly browser-based UI, so it will only run in the browser. Also, just like the web client, your business logic still runs securely on the server. So you have no business logic on the client. But the UI logic runs in the browser. So all the stuff that we have seen that, for example, when I click the comment button, that something pops out, etc., that is strictly client-side. So there's no round trips that go to the server to figure out what needs to be done. That can all be done client-side. All the server components that we currently have, like the text field, the portal, etc., are also web components in the NGClient. Actually, you can look how they are built. I'll show a bit later where you can see how that is done. And as you have seen, the NGClient is highly extendable through custom web components that you can build. You build these usually in just HTML and JavaScript. So that is a huge difference compared to the Wicked framework today. If you want to enhance that today, you would have to build a Java bean with a Wicked part in it. That's pretty tricky for the ones that have done that before. I guess they can agree. So this will be way easier in the future. And another important part of the NGClient is that it uses WebSockets. WebSockets are a standard of HTML5 that allow you to have a bi-directional real-time communication with a server. So the AJAX approach that we currently have is always polling, asking the server, is there something for me? So here we have a real-time live communication with the server, so the server can actually push something out to the client. So how about compatibility? As Jan mentioned, we try to make it as compatible as possible with the current smart and web client solutions, but there are a few exceptions. One is that there is no support for form-based reports, so you cannot print your form. And there is no support for on-render, both because the web component is strictly client-side. So Servoy doesn't really know what the component looks like. So we have no way of supporting on-render on something that we don't know what it can do. And the same goes for printing. We just don't know what the component does. So we can't print that. Obviously, something like the Web Client Utils plugin that many of you use today to gain some more control over what goes on in the browser is no longer needed, and it wouldn't be working either. The same goes for any third-party bean or plugin that does Swing or Wicked-specific stuff. That won't be working. And another maybe important thing is that form-level styling will no longer be supported. So the NGClient uses a solution-wide style sheet, but that style sheet can be strictly CSS. Today we have to parse any style sheet that you create and translate that to Java Swing properties or to browser CSS. In the NGClient, you will have a style sheet that can be just HTML CSS, like you would use it in a browser development. So that might be quite a change for some of you who use several style sheets on form level. But there is no way around that. So styling goes solution level. Solutions that are built for the NGClient are only compatible with other clients if they only utilize default Servoy components and don't utilize any NGClient specific services. We hear in a few minutes what a service is. It's obvious that if you create a web component, as we have seen, the Visualize.js or something, that won't do anything in a smart client. So it just doesn't work. We make sure that components that we ship, like the portal, fields, buttons, etc., that they work for all three environments. But as soon as you start building your own web components in the smart client, that's not going to work. So what is Angular? And why did we choose Angular? I will just give a short overview over what that is. If you want to build web components, you don't have to understand in detail what Angular does, but it might be a good idea to understand what the basic concepts are behind Angular. So Angular is a JavaScript framework for single-page applications, answering that question. So we are in a single page. What it does basically is it extends HTML with Angular-specific markup. The markup there is called directives and expressions. We'll see a few examples a bit later. Angular follows the MVC, the model view controller pattern. So yeah, in a second it becomes clear what that means. It tries to decouple DOM manipulation from application logic, and it tries to decouple client side of an application from the server side. One of the key things of Angular is data binding. Angular will take care that the view is updated whenever there is a change in the model, and vice versa. When there is a change in the view, so a user selects a checkbox or anything, Angular will make sure that the model updates. And it can do all this without any DOM manipulation. So no jQuery, get element, insert elements, and so forth. So Angular will take care of that. We have an example on the next slide that probably makes clear how that works. Another key concept are controllers. They are the behavior behind the DOM elements, so the functionality. Controller logic is clean, readable JavaScript. So you have there's no need to mess around in the DOM, registering callbacks or watching stuff. Angular will take care of that. All right, next is a little example. It's actually from the Angular website that demonstrates quite nicely how Angular works. I don't know if my cursor shows up now. You see here at the right side, the image shows what the HTML code on the left side produces. So we have a little to-do list with text up there and 3 items that you can check, and you can enter a text there and hit the add button, and it will produce a new to-do. So how's that done? I have highlighted a bit the markup that I mentioned. So everything that starts here with NG is Angular. So this basically says that this div is controlled by Angular. This is nothing that you would do in a Servoy environment because Servoy already is an NG app. Here is this is just a header with the to-do text here, and then here we have the controller that takes care of the logic here. So there is a to-do controller somewhere that we see on the next slide what that looks like. But here to the more interesting part. Now we have this 2 or 3 remaining archive thing here. That's a span here. What you see here is the curly brackets. That is an Angular expression, and it actually calls a function here, a function called remaining, and the remaining delivers obviously the number of the remaining to-dos. And then it inserts a property here, the length of an array of to-dos. We'll see the array when we see the controller JavaScript. So Angular will take care whenever the length of this array changes, then the number here updates. So this will all happen automatically. Then there we have here an NGClick. I forgot to highlight that. The NGClick will fire the archive method. And here's a very interesting part. This is the list now here of the to-dos. And you see here that there's only one list element, but this one is repeated. And ng repeat is the thing that takes care of that. So the ng repeat directive does a iteration over the items in the to-dos array that we've already guessed here. So you have a variable to-do that is one item of the to-dos. And then it repeats the whole list element for any to-do that you have on your array. And we'll just put a checkbox on here, and this, for example, will tie the checkbox value to a property of your to-do, of this item. So the done property will be updated. Here's an interesting case, for example, the class, the style class that is applied to the text here is also dynamic in the sense that it uses the to-do done property to set the right style class. So this will be done minus true or done minus false, depending on if the thing is checked or not. And then it will just insert this to-do text. Then down here we have the form here with the field and the button, and the submit will call a method add to do that we'll see in the next slide. The ng model is bound to the to-do text on the model, and so whenever you have add to do, it will obviously add an item to the array. This will lead, this will make Angular repeat the repeat thingy here, and automatically you have a fourth item in the list. So let's have a look at the controller. Yeah, one thing I want to mention here is that I think that everybody sees that this is fairly readable stuff. So there's no jQuery that inserts LE elements here or anything like that, but you immediately can see that something is repeated for a number of times, and it's a very readable code. So there's no hidden magic that goes on when your page loads or something, but you can instantly read this and understand what goes on. So here's the controller. So we can forget about the part up here a bit. Here's the array of to-dos. In this case, there's only one item on default in it. There's the add to do method that was bound to the submit button here, to the add. The add to do method will just push a new to do into the to dos array. Then we have the remaining function that was called to figure out how many open to dos there are. It obviously goes over all the to dos and checks if it's done or not, and return the result. And then there is the archive method. It will just what does it do? It will kick out items that are done. So also this very readable code. So no super magic, but it's all strictly data bound. So you are manipulating your data model here actually with the to-dos, and Angular will take care of the presentation, so of the view. So I hope this shows a bit the concept of Angular applications. Are there any questions until now, Jan?
Yeah, there's a couple. There's a question from Marco. The Angular library included in the Servoy's resources has all the Angular services like HTTP timeout location route?
Yeah, as far as I know, yeah.
Use the route service for client stuff.
Yeah, as far as I know, you can use them, yeah.
Okay.
I've never used that one, but I've used the timeout and was there. For example,
okay, that's just a question at the moment, so you go ahead.
All right. So, what are Servoy web components then? They're just not they're not only web components, but they add some. To sum up the data binding of Angular, Angular uses a two-way binding, as we have seen with the little example there already. So, for example, you could have a field that is bound to the model in two ways. So when something on a model changes, Angular will update the field, and when the field changes, will update the model. Then obviously you have a static text that is just bound to a label or something. But all your application here is client-side. So now when you want to communicate with an application server, you usually do that with RESTful services. So you collect the data that you want to send, and you send more or less by hand through RESTful. So what does Servoy do here now? Servoy now adds the server side to Angular, which is pretty spectacular once you grabbed what it can do for you. So we're using the WebSockets that I already mentioned to send everything that happens on the client-side model to the server. And as you can see here in the graph, the server where the actual NGClient runs will keep a copy of the model. On the next slide, it becomes clear what kind of advantages that offers. And it makes sure that changes in the model are persisted in the database. So this is the Servoy two-way binding here on the server side. And we add now this mechanism here in the middle using WebSockets, which is very fast and quite instant in two ways to synchronize the client-side model to the server. So what does that mean? As we've said, the server keeps the model, a copy of the model. That is very interesting for a number of reasons. For example, your client-side logic survives a page refresh. Since any changes done to the model on the client are synchronized to the server, when you do a page refresh, you already have a model with a state that you had before from the server. So stuff like your user zooms into a Google map and moves around, etc. You can actually persist that on the server if you put it right on the model. So whenever he hits a refresh, he will have the same zoom level and everything will be the same. So that is pretty powerful, makes it very easy to make sure that your application is consistent. It will also persist states, obviously, when you move around forms. So when a form is being hidden and shown again, it will have the same state as before. The server side also allows you to resolve certain properties server side. Maybe that's not obvious what that does. Let me try to find an example. For example, you have a tab panel, and the tab panel has a tab index. So the user clicked on the third tab. Your tab panel is a web component. So when in scripting on the server side, you say elements tab index, and you want to know the tab index, this would involve a round trip to the client, ask the web component what is the tab index, and then send it back. So since we have the model server side as well, we can resolve that property value on the server side. So that avoids round trips. Usually you use that for getters. So for any getter of a property that you would have, you can prevent a round trip to the client. You can also handle certain API calls server side, but that's a bit advanced topic. I don't think we'll dive into that today. As I said, that's very useful to improve performance. No round trips needed. And Servoy will always make sure that your server-side model is in sync with the client. It does that when your current method execution has ended. That is something important to know when you develop web components. So when you have a method that runs for a while and manipulates a lot on the model, nothing will happen client-side until your method is done. Only if you use API calls that go directly to the client, then the UI in the client will be updated. We'll see that a bit later when we try to build a little progress bar. Servoy also offers a few scope properties that you can use in components. As you can see here, properties that your component can have, like a value list or the background color or the font or anything, is provided through a SVI model in the scope that you are developing your directive in. Then it offers a SVI API that will make sure that methods that you define go directly to your component, so client side. So for example, a request focus. Something needs to happen in your component when a request focus is called. So that is done through Servay API. And then the other way around, if something happens in your component, for example, a mouse over or a mouse enter or on click or something like that, you can use Servay handlers to call methods in the NGClient on the server side. We also support services. Angular services are a concept that is, well, similar to web components, except that they usually have no UI. An example is the notification that we've seen before. While that does have a little UI, it's not tied to the form really. So the notification is only shown when you call in scripting show notification. So that is something that is globally available that you can use anywhere without having to put a component on your form. So that is basically what a service does. It provides a functionality across your application that you can call from scripting using the plugin scope. So I don't know if that will always remain like that. Another way would be to have it on a scope called services, but I think the plugins is probably the right place, and that's where it shows up today. So if you define a service, you can call it like plugins.myAngularService.do something. The model of a service is also synced between server and client, so that is the same. And services, you can provide APIs just like web components, but there won't be any handlers because usually your services, they don't fire any events. Servoy also provides a bunch of directives that do more or less the same that Angular can also do for you, like you have seen before the NGClick that we had on a link or somewhere. Servoy provides a Servay click. The reason why we do this is we know if a method is actually assigned to a on-click property of your component. So if you use Angular NGClick, it will always watch for the click, no matter if there's actually a method to be called or not. So Servay click is a bit more optimized in that sense. So there's a whole list of stuff that you can use out of the box that all start with Servay, like the Servay click, the Servay focus gain, the Servay font, Servay tooltip, etc. So a whole list of design and runtime properties that we'll provide for you to use in web components. So let's have a short look of the structure of a web component. So what is it actually, development-wise? As probably has become clear by now, is that web components reside in a browser. They usually consist of a JavaScript file and an HTML template. So your controller code, just as we've seen before with the Angular example, is the JavaScript file, and the HTML template is usually is a div that is inserted wherever you place your component. Then it can have all kinds of external JavaScript libraries that you might use, CSS, and all kinds of resources like images and so forth. But the most simple setup is a JavaScript file and HTML. So one of the problems that we have with web components that you guys build because you found something on the web is that we don't know what this component, what it offers. What kind of properties does it want? What kind of methods, etc. So Servoy needs to know how to interact with the component. So that is where we leave normal web component development, because now we add a new file here that is needed in order to make Servoy understand the component, and that is a so-called spec file. So what is a spec file? A spec file is a simple text file that contains, oops, do you see PowerPoint restarting? Jesus Christ.
It looks like PowerPoint restarting it.
Yeah. So why is that?
It's a default feature of the new version of Microsoft Office.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yep. All right, so I'm back, right?
Yep.
So the spec file, what is it? It's a text file with JSON in it that contains metadata that basically describes the component, like what is the name and where's the definition and so forth. Then the definition of the model. So basically the property markers that you will be using. Then definition of API that your component might have. Definition of handlers. And links to libraries like external resources, like JavaScript files or CSS or images and stuff like that. So where are they? They reside in the resource project. So I don't know if you can see that right here. So in the resources, you will find a components directory and a services directory. This one is for the web components and the other one is for services. And then I think I have, it's a service opened here, a Hello World service. There you see the JavaScript file. The service doesn't need the HTML part. Here is the Angular service definition. We'll look at that a bit later. Here's an example spec file. As I said, that the metadata, for example, the name, the display name, where is the definition file, so the JavaScript file, are there any libraries? Here's an example of an API. So this thing can say hello. And you need a manifest for this directory here. This directory, the demo services, that we call a bundle. So you can bundle any number of web components to one logical group. So for example, you could have a web component bundle called chart components. And in there, you have a web component for bar chart or line chart or stuff like that. So here you see two nodes here in the resources, the components and the services. They, in this case here, have the services, and it shows the demo services bundle here. So this is the only directory I have inside services. So this is what you see, the demo services. So when you click on components here, you would see the demo components bundle. All right, building web components. We'll do that in a second, I think, a bit live. So I go over here a bit quickly, just as you've seen in the slide before. So this is a most simple spec file that just specifies name, the display name that you see in developer, a definition. This is the server-side API if you have any. So there could be a server script. So this Hello World Server.js would contain, for example, the getters that I mentioned that return the tab index from the model. Here's a libraries section, the model, the API, and there's no handlers in here. And this is a sample JavaScript file. So this is the most simple thing that you can have. It will just create a module called Hello World component and directive Hello World component. This is a bit magic of Angular's mapping here. So this makes sure that whenever you use model in your scope, you get this phi model that I've mentioned before. So this mapping is usually what you would have there. So basically, you can just copy this sort of text block and start building your component by just exchanging the names here. And then in the link function here, you will have your actual logic. So we'll see that in a second, how that works. I think that we'll add support for creating these templates. So right now you have to create them manually, but there's lots of components already that you can copy these from. So the template is the most simple thing. It looks like this. So it's usually a div, and inside your div, you do your magic. So let's see how that works. What I try to build just for the heck of demonstration is for something from Bootstrap. Let's get Bootstrap. For example, the progress bar is always a nice one. So this thingy here. So something like this that can update and show a progress of whatever hefty job that you're doing. Oops. Get rid of PowerPoint. Sorry. All right. So the first step could be that we just copy this HTML code here. Oops. Copy it. So then I have to created a empty solution here that has nothing. Yep. Now here in the navigator, I'm navigating to the resources. And I created a directory here called Webinar Components. And I also created a few empty files here that I think they're still empty. All right. So as mentioned before, this is the typical setup that you will have: the HTML file and the JavaScript file, plus the spec file then. So the HTML we just put here for a start. So then in the spec file, so what do? We specify a name for this. So webinar progress bar. This syntax is a bit different than the camel casing here. That is because Angular normalizes names. So for an element name, HTML doesn't like camel case, so you would typically use something with the minuses here. So webinar progress bar. This is what you see in the developer. So then the next thing is, I copy that because it's a bit faster than typing it, is where is the definition file? The definition file is this JavaScript file. So the path here is my bundle name, webinar components, then we have the webinar progress bar, and then this is the JavaScript file. On the model, I already have a size property here. You see that is even a complex property because it has a type dimension. Dimension has a width and height thingy. So here you can even supply default values. So when you drag this component to your form, it will be inserted with a width of 400 and height of 30. That's what the default does here. Well, that's almost good enough for a start, but we can add something here to the model right away. And when dealing with a progress bar, we obviously want a value, the progress value, and we make that an integer. And we can already add some API because it's quite obvious that we want to have something like a set progress. And that is a function that is described with parameters. Oops. This is a bit tricky here because you really have to make sure that whatever you do here is plain JSON. Newer versions of Servoy 8 already have a parser that will warn you if you do something bad in here. So not the version that I'm using, so I have to be careful what I type here. The name of the parameter is value, and the type of the parameter can be integer. So something like this. All right, so what's missing is the actual thing here. This is an empty thing that I created before. So all I need to do is give my thing a name here, webinar progress bar. The directive has the same name. All right. So now we have to add some API to this. As you remember, we have on the API, we have the setProgress method. So when I want to implement that now client side, because the setProgress actually happens on the client side, I need to implement something here. That happens on the scope. I'm not going to go into detail what the real syntax here is. After you have built 2 or 3 components, it becomes very obvious what goes on here. So we receive a value. So we have the method setProgress on the API, and we receive a value here. So on the model, we have defined a value, and that needs to be updated now. So we have a $scope model. That's the model value equals the value that comes in. So this is basically it. And now what's missing is the link to the template. Let me copy that real quick so I don't bore you with my typos. So this is the template. So that is the HTML file that we've created. So now we have one remaining problem, that this HTML here is static. So it will create a progress bar with a width of 60, like this one. So in this case, we have to make this a bit more dynamic. So one of the things that Angular offers, as you have seen, are expressions. So the width of the progress bar is driven by this property back here. So what I can do is I just take out the thingy here and insert the value of the model. So I can easily write model value, and that will Angular will now replace this with the value whenever the value changes. That is the magic that Angular does. So now we can be nice guys and put this also here and here. That is for the text. So this is basically all that you will need for a web component. So let's see if that works. This is the HTML form designer that we have. So this is the new stuff here, but it doesn't find my component. That is a wrong one. I don't know why that happens. This is probably needs a restart because it didn't read this right here. When I prepared the demo, I played with webinar components, so forth. So now I have a bit of a mess. Let me see if that is fixed now, or if I need to restart this. Let me shortly restart the thing here. Any questions in the meantime, Jan?
No, I'm not seeing any questions at this point in time. Well, first of all, let me start with the good news. And the good news is if you don't want to build your own components, you still get everything that you got in Servoy 7. So for the developers that are not willing to create their own HTML, etc., you don't have to, because everything remains the same. And on top of that, you get the capability to create your own components that can, as you will see in this demo, integrate very easily into Servoy. Over to you, Patrick.
I forgot something. I forgot to put my component on the manifest. That's why it didn't show up. In the manifest, all the components are stated that you are using. So it will basically point to the spec file. So the manifest resides in the bundle directory and lists all the web components that are relevant. So if you have a web component that's not noted in here, but it's still in your bundle, then it won't show up. So now I should be fine with my progress bar thingy. Oh, not yet. Well, low level refresh. Let me see if it finds it now. Otherwise, we need another restart. Well, this is alpha software, so please forgive this. Next restart, it should show up.
That is always the fun part of using an alpha version with a demo, but
well, yeah, refresh of resources is a bit of a tricky thing. So, do we finally have it? There it is. Excellent. So there is the component. So what you see here is the new designer. So we're actually looking at an HTML page. So this we're in the browser here. You see that is browser. The properties that we are being offered now is there's not much. There's a default properties of any component that you do. Plus, there's the one thing that we put on the model. You remember that we had a value on the model that shows up here. So I can enter like a 20 or something as a default. So now let's see if this shows something. Well, so Tomcat always gives me a bit trouble. Here we go. All right, so everybody should see a progress bar with a value of 20. So the next thing to look at is the API that we have come up with. Let's put a button here. Let's see if the form designer allows me to attach a method. Yeah, it does. Excellent. Oh, I have one. Prepared that a bit, but I can't find the button because GoToMeeting is in the way. Yeah, prepared that. See, but the bean name now is different. So what it shows here is the API of the thing, and it takes that from the spec file. So in the spec file, we said we have a property called value, and we have a method called setProgress. So what I'm doing is I set the progress to 0, then I wait a bit, and then we go over, let's say we go to 100 to the bitter end. We set the progress and we wait slightly. So let's see how that does. So here's our button. So first it goes to 0, and now it starts counting up. What that demonstrates nicely also is WebSockets. Because if you do this kind of thing with Ajax, then you don't get the visual feeling that we have right now. So actually, we have sent 100 requests over WebSocket now. So I think it has become a bit clear how web components are built, that it's not rocket science to do that. Of course, this is a very easy and straightforward example. But I mean, many of the components that you find don't do a lot more than stuff like this. So they're basically styling and little client-side behavior. So they're not overcomplicated in general. Of course, there are components like that, like the timeline. Maybe that's a bit more complex, but stuff like this is very straightforward. It took us 5 minutes now to build this. All right. So the last thing that I wanted to show was one example of responsive design. So let's see if that does what it should do. I have that running here. Let me start this one. So this is the solution that you actually saw in the slides from Jan. And it demonstrates the point. All these components, they don't do anything except for looking nice. But now I resized my window a bit. Watch. So now the four how these called thingies here that we had in one row, they now jump in 2 rows. The here we had 2 panels next to each other. Now they're below each other. You see, that is what responsive design does for you when you have a flow layout. So now watch the menu. When I go even smaller, oops, menu is gone. So the menu now pops up here. See, the menu is here. So this is what you would be using on an iPhone, for example. So that is the idea behind responsive design. This solution actually is built with a solution model, because currently we don't have support for the layout containers needed here, but we can already use them in a solution model. So for the time being, this is a bit of coding, but in the future, what you will have is a new component that is called a layout container, and you can assign any grid style class that you like. So this uses Bootstrap, so you have the typical column 3, etc. For those of you who know the Bootstrap grid system, this is simply done by classes assigned to the layout containers. These layout containers can also be nested, which is probably the case for this one. So the 2 panels here, they are in one container, but each of them has a container of its own. So this is quite impressive. I think that these kind of things will also be possible in the future.